The silver moon hung low over the rugged Montana landscape as Isaiah O'Connor rode wearily through Shadow Creek Valley, the weight of 7 months' bounty hunting heavy on his shoulders. He hadn't planned on returning, not after everything that had happened, but something in the wind seemed to pull at him, a haunting melody that stirred memories he'd fought hard to bury. It was 1878, and the territory was still wild, a place where a man could lose himself or find himself, depending on which way the cards fell. Isaiah had chosen the former after the incident at Miller's Creek left him with blood on his hands and nightmares that wouldn't quit. Taking bounties meant he didn't have to think, just track, hunt, and collect. It was simpler that way. His sorrel stallion, Copper, snorted beneath him, ears flicking forward at a sound Isaiah couldn't yet hear. The late August sun was sinking fast, painting the valley in deepening shades of amber and gold. In another hour it would be full dark, and he'd need to make camp. "What is it, boy?" Isaiah murmured, loosening his Colt in its holster out of habit. 7 months of tracking outlaws across 4 territories had sharpened his instincts to a deadly edge. That's when he heard a woman's voice, clear as a bell, carried on the evening breeze. She was singing, the melody hauntingly familiar. It tugged at something deep in his chest, something he thought he'd buried the day he left Shadow Creek. "Bella," he whispered, the name escaping his lips before he could stop it. Bella Thompson had been his future once, before the bounty that changed everything. Before he'd killed her brother in self-defense. The singing grew louder as he urged Copper forward, cresting a ridge that overlooked a small homestead nestled against the foothills. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a figure stood in the yard, hanging laundry in the fading light. Isaiah froze, heart hammering against his ribs. It couldn't be. He'd heard she'd moved east after everything happened, gone to live with her aunt in Boston. Yet there she was, her honey-brown hair catching the last rays of sunlight, her voice lifting in a song he remembered from happier times. For a long moment he sat motionless on his horse, torn between riding away and riding down to her. In the end, it wasn't his choice at all. Bella turned, as if sensing his presence, her song trailing off mid-verse. Even at this distance, he could see how she stiffened, one hand going to her throat. "Isaiah," her voice carried up to him, equal parts disbelief and something else he couldn't name. He should leave. Nothing good could come of this reunion. But instead, he found himself nudging Copper forward, descending the slope toward the woman he'd once promised to marry, the woman whose brother's death was the reason he'd fled. "Evening, Bella," he called, his voice rougher than he intended, scraping against his dry throat like sandpaper. She stood her ground as he approached, chin lifting in that stubborn way he remembered so well. She was thinner than before, her blue calico dress hanging a bit loose on her frame, but her eyes were the same clear blue as a mountain lake, and just as deep. "They said you weren't coming back," she said, no welcome in her voice. Isaiah dismounted slowly, keeping his distance. "I wasn't planning to." "Then why are you here?" He had no answer that made sense, not even to himself. How could he explain that he'd been drawn back by a feeling, by the wind itself seeming to carry her voice to him when he was 3 days' ride away? That he'd found himself turning Copper homeward without conscious thought, just passing through, he said instead, the lie bitter on his tongue. Bella's eyes narrowed. 7 months without a word, Isaiah, not even a letter. "What was I supposed to say?" he asked, his tone sharper than intended. "Sorry I shot your brother when he tried to rob the stage. Sorry I couldn't prove he was working with the Delgado gang before the marshal put a bounty on my head." Pain flashed across her face. "James wasn't, he was," Isaiah cut in, the old argument rising between them like a wall. "I saw him, Bella. He was wearing a mask, but I knew those eyes. I knew the scar on his wrist." She turned away, shoulders stiff. "Marshal Holt dropped the charges against you 3 months ago. Evidence came to light. You've been cleared." The news hit Isaiah like a physical blow. "What evidence?" "They caught Miguel Delgado. He confessed James was working with them." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Turns out my brother was exactly what you said, a liar and a thief." Isaiah took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "Bella, I don't." She faced him again, and now he could see the tears she was fighting. "Don't say you're sorry. Don't say anything. You were right, and I called you a murderer. I told you I hated you. You had reason to believe what you did." Isaiah removed his hat, turning the brim in his hands. "He was your brother." A bitter laugh escaped her. "And you were the man I was going to marry. I should have trusted you." The silence between them stretched, filled with all the things they'd lost. In the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that echoed how Isaiah had felt these past months. Finally, Bella gestured toward the cabin. "It's getting dark. You can stay the night if you want. There's stew." It was more than he deserved, and they both knew it. "I don't want to impose. It's your land too, Isaiah, or did you forget our arrangement?" He hadn't forgotten. They'd pooled their savings to buy this piece of land, 100 acres with water rights and good grazing. The deed bore both their names, a wedding present to themselves. The wedding that never happened. "I figured you'd have sold your half by now," he admitted. "To whom?" "No one's buying land out here anymore, not since the railroad decided to route through Billings instead." She turned toward the cabin. "Put your horse in the barn. There's oats in the bin." It was as close to an invitation as he was going to get. Isaiah led Copper to the small barn, taking his time removing the saddle and brushing down the tired animal. It gave him a chance to gather his thoughts, to steel himself for whatever came next. The cabin looked different than he remembered. Bella had finished the porch he'd started building, adding a railing and what looked like a swing. Curtains hung in the windows, and flower boxes sprouted late-season blooms. She'd made it a home in his absence. When he finally worked up the courage to knock on the door, Bella opened it without a word, stepping aside to let him enter. The interior was warm and smelled of beef stew and fresh bread. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace he'd built with his own hands, and a kerosene lamp cast a soft glow over the simple furnishings. "You've done a lot with the place," he said, setting his hat on the peg by the door. Had to keep busy somehow. She moved to the stove, stirring the pot of stew. "Sit, you look half-starved." Isaiah sat at the small table, acutely aware of how out of place he felt in what should have been his own home. He watched as Bella efficiently ladled stew into 2 bowls, cut thick slices of bread, and set everything on the table. She moved differently now, more sure of herself, less of the girl and more of the woman. "Thank you," he said as she placed a bowl in front of him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and he felt her flinch. They ate in silence for a time, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the fireplace. It was Bella who finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Where have you been all this time?" Isaiah set down his spoon. "Wyoming, mostly. Colorado for a while." "Took up bounty hunting." Her eyes widened slightly. "Dangerous work." "It suited me." He didn't elaborate on the dark places his mind had gone, the risks he'd taken because part of him hadn't cared if he lived or died. "And now, where are you headed?" He hesitated. He'd had no destination in mind when he turned Copper toward Montana, only the inexplicable pull that had led him here. "Don't rightly know," he admitted. Bella studied him, those blue eyes seeing more than he wanted to reveal. "You look tired, Isaiah." "I am," he said simply, the admission costing him. "Tired in ways sleep doesn't fix." Something softened in her expression. "I know the feeling." Another silence fell, less strained than before. When they finished eating, Isaiah stood to help with the dishes, falling into the rhythm they'd once had, him washing while she dried. "I kept your things," Bella said suddenly, nodding toward a trunk in the corner. "Everything you left behind." Isaiah swallowed hard. He'd ridden out with just what he could carry, leaving behind most of his possessions, including his father's pocket watch and his mother's Bible, things he'd regretted not taking more times than he could count. "I appreciate that," he said, his voice rough. "I didn't do it for thanks." She set down the plate she was drying. "I did it because I couldn't bear to get rid of them. Even when I thought I hated you, I couldn't let go." The confession hung in the air between them. Isaiah turned to face her fully, close enough now to see the faint freckles across her nose, the small scar on her chin from falling out of a tree when she was 12. "I never stopped loving you," he said, the truth spilling out before he could stop it. "Not for a single day." Bella's eyes filled with tears. "Don't say that if you're just passing through. Don't say it if you're leaving again." "And if I'm not?" he asked, hardly daring to hope. "If I'm tired of running," she shook her head, stepping back. I don't know, Isaiah, so much has happened. We're different people now, are we? He took a careful step forward. Or are we just who we always were without the lies between us? A tear slipped down her cheek. James was still my brother and you still killed him. Yes, Isaiah acknowledged, not looking away. And I'll carry that with me always. But he made his choice, Bella, just as I made mine. And I made mine when I sent you away, she whispered, when I chose blood over love. Isaiah reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and brushed the tear from her cheek. We were both betrayed by him. Maybe we can stop letting that betrayal stand between us. Bella closed her eyes at his touch, pain and longing warring on her face. When she opened them again, there was resolve in her gaze. I can't just pick up where we left off, Isaiah. Too much water under that bridge, he nodded, letting his hand fall. I understand. But she continued, maybe we can start again, slower this time. It was more than he dared to hope for when he crested that ridge and saw her standing in the yard. I'd like that. Bella stepped back, putting space between them. You can take the back room for tonight. It's small, but there's a cot. Thank you. Isaiah picked up his hat from the peg. I think I'll step out for a smoke first, if that's all right. She nodded, and he stepped onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air. Stars crowded the sky above, more than you could count in 10 lifetimes. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the match briefly illuminating his weathered face. Behind him, the door opened, and Bella joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. It's a beautiful night, she said, looking up at the stars. Always loved the sky out here, Isaiah agreed. Missed it, truth be told. Bella leaned against the porch rail. I used to come out here every night and look for the North Star. My pa always said it would guide you home if you were lost. Isaiah took a long drag on his cigarette. Is that what you were doing earlier? When you were singing, she glanced at him, surprised. You heard me. Clear as day from up on the ridge. It was your voice that drew me here, Bella, called me home like. He trailed off, embarrassed by how fanciful it sounded. Like what? She prompted. Like the wind itself was carrying it to me, he finished quietly. Sounds foolish, I know. Bella was silent for a long moment. My mother used to say that when you love someone, truly love them, your souls can speak to each other across any distance. Her voice was so soft he had to lean closer to hear. I thought it was just a pretty story. And now, she met his eyes. Now I wonder. Isaiah carefully extinguished his cigarette. I should turn in. Dawn comes early. Isaiah, Bella called as he reached for the door. Are you really staying, or will you be gone when I wake up? He turned back to her, seeing the vulnerability she was trying to hide. I'll be here, Bella. For as long as you'll have me. Something like hope flickered in her eyes. Good night, then. Good night, he replied, carrying the image of her standing in the moonlight with him as he retired to the small back room. Sleep was a long time coming. Isaiah lay on the narrow cot, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling and the occasional hoot of an owl outside. It felt surreal to be back, to be under the same roof as Bella again. He didn't fool himself that things would be easy. Too much had happened. Too many wounds still needed healing. But for the first time in 7 months, he felt something like peace stealing over him. He was home. The morning brought a pale autumn sun and the scent of coffee brewing. Isaiah rose early, habit too ingrained to break even for comfort's sake. He found his old clothes in the trunk Bella had mentioned, clean and neatly folded, and changed from his trail-worn outfit into a blue chambray shirt and less threadbare trousers. When he emerged from the back room, Bella was already at the stove, her hair braided down her back, wearing a simple dress of faded green cotton. Coffee's hot, she said without turning. Thought we might have flapjacks. Sounds good, Isaiah replied, pouring himself a cup from the pot. What needs doing around the place? Figure I should earn my keep. Now she did look at him, one eyebrow raised. The north fence needs mending. Lost a calf to wolves last month because of the gap, and the roof leaks over the back room when it rains hard. Isaiah nodded. I'll see to the fence today, roof tomorrow. Just like that. Bella flipped a flapjack with more force than necessary. You're staying then, if that's all right with you. He sat at the table watching her work. Half the land is still mine, legally speaking. But I won't stay where I'm not welcome, Bella. She was quiet as she finished cooking, placing a plate of flapjacks in front of him before sitting with her own. I've been managing on my own, she said finally. It hasn't been easy, but I've done it. I can see that, Isaiah acknowledged. Place looks better than when I left it. That's not, Bella sighed. I'm not looking for compliments, Isaiah. I'm trying to say I don't need you to take care of things. I know that, but maybe you shouldn't have to do everything alone. He met her gaze steadily. That was the whole idea when we bought this place together, wasn't it? To build something together, Bella poked at her food. That was before. Before, Isaiah agreed. But here we are after, and I'm offering to help, not take over. She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Fair enough. Tools are still in the shed. I managed to keep most of the stock: 4 cows with calves, 2 horses besides yours, and a dozen chickens. More than I expected, Isaiah said, impressed. Most women alone would have sold off the livestock, unable to manage both animals and crops. Mr. Peterson from the next valley over helps with the heavy work when he can. His boy Bobby comes by to chop wood sometimes. There was a slight defensiveness in her tone. Good neighbors are worth their weight in gold, Isaiah said simply. He finished his breakfast and stood. I'll get to that fence. He spent the morning checking the entire north fence line, finding not just the one break Bella had mentioned, but several places where the wire was sagging or posts were leaning. It would take more than a day to fix it all properly. By noon, sweat soaked his shirt despite the mild temperature, and he'd repaired the worst of the damage. Bella appeared with a canteen of water and a bundle wrapped in cloth. Thought you might be hungry, she said, handing him both. Much obliged. Isaiah took a long drink, then unwrapped what turned out to be bread, cheese, and sliced apple. You didn't have to bring this out. I was checking the west field anyway, she said with a shrug, but he noted she'd put on a nicer shawl than practical work would warrant. They sat in the shade of a large pine, eating in companionable silence. Birds called overhead, and in the distance, cattle lowed softly. You've done well with the place, Isaiah said eventually. Not many women could have managed alone. Bella brushed crumbs from her skirt. I almost didn't. First winter was hard. Pipe froze and burst, couldn't afford to hire help to fix it, had to haul water from the creek for 3 weeks in February. Isaiah winced. I'm sorry I wasn't here. That's not why I told you, she said quickly. Just explaining how things have been. He nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying, that she'd built a life without him, faced challenges, overcome them. That she wasn't the same young woman who had depended on him for so much. Tell me about your bounty hunting, Bella said, changing the subject. Did you? Was it very dangerous? Isaiah considered how much to share. Dangerous enough, tracked some bad men, brought most of them in alive. Most, her eyes were steady on his face. There were 2 who didn't give me a choice, he said quietly. I didn't take any pleasure in it, Bella, she looked away. I believe you. They sat a moment longer before she stood, brushing off her skirt. I should get back, got bread rising. Bella, Isaiah called as she started to walk away. She paused, looking back. Thank you for the lunch. A small smile, the first he'd seen since his return, curved her lips. You're welcome. Isaiah watched her walk back toward the cabin, her figure silhouetted against the bright midday sky. He'd forgotten how she moved, with that slight swing to her step, confident and graceful all at once. He'd forgotten so many things about her, or perhaps just buried them too deep to bear remembering. He returned to work with renewed purpose, determined to finish as much of the fence as possible before dark. When he finally made his way back to the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the valley in the same golden light that had welcomed him home the day before. Bella was at the water pump, filling a bucket. She straightened when she saw him approach, pushing a strand of hair from her face. You've been at it a long time, she observed, wanted to get as much done as possible. Isaiah took the heavy bucket from her hands without asking. Got most of the north line secure, need to check east tomorrow. East should be fine. I ride the boundary every week, and I was just out there Monday. He raised an eyebrow, impressed again. Smart practice. Learned it from you, she said simply, leading the way inside. A pot of what smelled like rabbit stew simmered on the stove, and the fresh bread she'd mentioned was cooling on the table. The domesticity of the scene struck Isaiah with unexpected force. This was what he'd dreamed of during the long, lonely nights on the trail. A home, a warm meal, Bella. I'll just wash up, he said, setting the bucket down. When he returned, face and hands clean, Bella had set the table and was ladling stew into bowls. They ate with less tension than the night before, Bella even asking more questions about his time away, listening intently to his carefully edited stories. "What about you?" Isaiah asked eventually. "Besides keeping this place running, what's happened while I was gone?" Bella seemed surprised by the question. "Not much to tell, town's grown some. Got a new school teacher, Miss Winters. She's trying to start a proper library." She hesitated. "Old man Jenkins passed last winter and the Wilsons had twins in April." "And you?" Isaiah pressed gently. "Besides fighting frozen pipes and wolves, what's filled your days?" She looked down at her bowl. "I took up drawing again, and Mrs. Miller from town taught me to make soap, been selling it at the general store for extra money." "You always were good with your hands," Isaiah said, remembering the small sketches she used to do, the careful way she'd embroidered handkerchiefs for him when they were courting. "I kept busy," she said with a shrug. "It was easier than thinking." The admission hung between them, honest and painful. Isaiah understood completely his bounty hunting had served the same purpose. After dinner, they sat on the porch despite the cooling air, neither quite ready to retreat to separate rooms. Isaiah smoked while Bella worked on what looked like mending, her needle flashing in the light spilling from the open door. "I miss this," Isaiah said after a while, sitting quiet at day's end, Bella's hands stilled. "I used to sit out here and imagine you were just late coming in from the fields, that any minute I'd hear Copper's hooves coming up the path." The confession cost her, he could tell. "I thought about turning back 100 times, he admitted, "but I was sure you hated me." "I tried to," she said softly. "For a long time I convinced myself I did, but hate's a hard thing to maintain when you love someone." Isaiah looked at her sharply. "Present tense," Bella set her mending aside, not meeting his eyes. "I never stopped, Isaiah, not really. Even when I wanted to." He reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. This time she didn't pull away. "I'm sorry for staying away so long," he said. "Sorry for not being here when you needed me." "And I'm sorry for not believing in you," she replied, fingers tightening around his. "For choosing what I thought was loyalty to James over faith in the man I knew you were." They sat like that for a long time, holding hands as the stars emerged above them, neither wanting to break the fragile connection. Finally, Bella stood. "It's getting late." Isaiah rose as well, reluctantly letting go of her hand. "Good night, Bella." She hesitated, then stood on tiptoe to press a soft, quick kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Isaiah." Then she was gone, disappearing into the cabin. Isaiah remained on the porch, his cheek burning where her lips had touched. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, the first crack in the wall between them. He raised his hand to the spot, a smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in 7 months, he allowed himself to hope. The following days fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Isaiah rose early each morning, tended to the animals, and worked on the endless tasks a homestead required: mending fences, patching the roof, chopping wood for the coming winter. Bella cooked, cleaned, tended her vegetable garden, and looked after the chickens. They ate meals together, talking more freely with each passing day, rediscovering each other. In the evenings, they sat on the porch or by the fire, sometimes in comfortable silence, sometimes sharing stories of their time apart. Bit by bit, the distance between them narrowed, though neither pushed too quickly. A week after Isaiah's return, they rode together to check the eastern boundary. It was the first time they'd both been on horseback together since before everything fell apart, and there was something freeing about being away from the cabin, moving through the land they shared. "Race you to the ridge," Bella called suddenly, a spark of her old playfulness emerging as she urged her mare forward. Isaiah grinned, giving Copper his head. They thundered across the open meadow, the horses neck and neck, both riders leaning low over their mounts' necks. Bella's laughter floated back to him, a sound he hadn't heard in too long. She beat him to the ridge by half a length, pulling up her mare with a triumphant whoop. "Still can't catch me, O'Connor." "Wasn't really trying," Isaiah claimed, though they both knew it for the lie it was. Bella's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, hair coming loose from its braid. She looked younger, freer, more like the woman he'd fallen in love with. I've missed this, she said, echoing his thoughts. Being out in the open. Me too. Isaiah gazed out over their land, the valley stretching below them, mountains rising in the distance. There's nothing like this anywhere else I've been. They dismounted to rest the horses, sitting side by side on a fallen log. Bella produced an apple from her pocket, cutting it in half with a small knife and offering a piece to Isaiah. I've been thinking, she said as they ate. Dangerous pastime, he teased. She nudged his shoulder with hers. Be serious. I've been thinking about us, what happened, where we go from here. Isaiah sobered. And what have you concluded? That life's too short to waste it on regret. Bella met his eyes directly. James made his choices, I made mine, you made yours. We can't change any of that. No, Isaiah agreed. We can't, but we can choose what happens next. She took a deep breath. I want to try again, Isaiah. I want to see if we can rebuild what we had. Joy surged through him, but he tempered it with caution. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel rushed, I'm sure, she interrupted. I've had 7 months to think about what I lost when you rode away. I don't want to lose another day. Isaiah reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. Nor do I. The kiss that followed was tentative at first, a rediscovery after so long apart. But it quickly deepened, years of love and months of longing pouring into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Well, Bella said, a smile playing at her lips. That hasn't changed. Isaiah laughed, feeling lighter than he had in longer than he could remember. Some things don't. They rode back to the cabin hand in hand, horses walking close beside each other. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. That night, Isaiah moved his things from the back room to the main bedroom they had once shared. They made love slowly, relearning each other's bodies, finding both familiar territory and new discoveries. Afterward, Bella laid her head on his chest, her fingers tracing patterns on his skin. I never thought I'd have this again, she murmured. Isaiah pressed a kiss to her hair. Nor did I. Every day I was gone, I thought of you, of this place, wondered if I'd ever find my way back. What changed your mind? She asked. Why did you come back now? Isaiah was quiet for a moment, thinking how to explain. I was in Wyoming, near the Bighorns. Had just collected a bounty, was figuring where to head next. I made camp as the sun was setting, and suddenly, I swear I heard your voice on the wind, singing that song your mother taught you. Bella raised her head to look at him. The valley song, he nodded. Clear as if you were standing next to me. I told myself it was just the wind in the trees, but 3 nights in a row I heard it. On the 3rd night, I gave up fighting it and turned copper north. He smiled wryly. Thought I might be going crazy, but I had to know. That's. Bella shook her head, wonder in her expression. Isaiah, I started singing that song every evening after I learned about James's confession, standing in the yard at dusk singing into the wind. My mother always said that when you truly love someone, your souls can speak across any distance. Isaiah finished, remembering her words from that first night. They stared at each other, a shiver of something inexplicable passing between them. Do you think it's possible? Bella whispered. That I really called you home, Isaiah pulled her closer. I don't know how else to explain it. One moment I was set on heading to Colorado, the next I couldn't think of anything but getting back to you. Bella laid her head back on his chest. Maybe some things are beyond explaining. Maybe so, he agreed, stroking her hair. All I know is I'm where I belong. As autumn deepened, Isaiah and Bella fell back into the partnership they'd once envisioned, working side by side to prepare the homestead for winter. The cabin needed weatherproofing, the livestock required extra care, and food had to be stored. It was hard work, but they tackled it together, finding joy in their shared purpose. They began to socialize again as well. The first trip into town was awkward, whispers following them down the street, but Isaiah held his head high, Bella's hand firmly in his. They stopped at the general store, where Mr. Davis greeted them with surprising warmth. Good to see you back, O'Connor, the storekeeper said, pumping Isaiah's hand. Heard you were cleared of all charges. News travels fast, Isaiah commented. Small town, Davis replied with a shrug. Folks were hard on you at first, but most came around after the Delgado confession. And the way Miss Thompson stood by you once the truth came out, well, that counted for something. Isaiah glanced at Bella, who was suddenly very interested in examining a bolt of fabric. She stood by me. Davis looked uncomfortable. Perhaps that's her story to tell. 6 pounds of flour, was it, Miss Thompson? Later, as they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Isaiah asked, "What did Davis mean about you standing by me?" Bella busied herself arranging packages. "It wasn't a big thing. After Marshal Holt announced you'd been cleared, there was talk in town. Some people still wanted to believe the worst. I just set them straight." "Set them straight how?" she sighed. "There was a town meeting about organizing a posse to track down the rest of the Delgado gang. Someone made a comment about you, suggested maybe you'd been working with them too. I stood up and told them exactly what kind of man you are. Reminded them how you'd saved the schoolchildren during the flood 2 springs back, how you'd always been first to help when anyone needed it." Isaiah stared at her. "You defended me, even before you knew I might come back." "Of course I did," Bella said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "It was the truth, and I was ashamed for not having defended you from the start." He reached for her hand. "Thank you." "Nothing to thank me for," she insisted. "Should have done it sooner." As they drove home, Isaiah found himself deeply moved by the thought of Bella standing up in front of the whole town, defending his name when he wasn't even there to know about it. It spoke to a loyalty he hadn't dared hope for after everything that had happened. The first snow came in early November, blanketing the valley in white. Isaiah and Bella spent the cold evenings planning for spring what to plant, whether to expand the herd, improvements they wanted to make to the cabin. But they also talked about bigger things, about marriage, about children, about the future they'd once planned and now hoped to reclaim. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Isaiah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "What's this?" Bella asked as he handed it to her. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a ring, not the simple band he'd given her before, but a delicate silver piece with a small diamond flanked by 2 blue stones. "Isaiah," Bella breathed. "I've been saving from the bounty money," he explained. "Had it made in Billings last week when I went to sell the calves." He took her hand. "I know we're already promised to each other in all the ways that matter, but I wanted to do this proper. Bella Thompson, will you marry me?" Again, tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her deeply. "When?" she asked when they finally broke apart. "Spring," Isaiah shook his head. "I was thinking Christmas. No sense waiting any longer than we have to." "Christmas," Bella agreed, her smile radiant in the firelight. "A new beginning at year's end." They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church in town, with most of the community in attendance. If there had been whispers before, they were silenced by the obvious love between bride and groom. Bella wore a dress of deep blue velvet, a gift from Isaiah, and carried evergreens tied with ribbon. Isaiah wore a new suit, his face clean-shaven for the occasion, his eyes never leaving his bride. After the simple ceremony, they hosted a celebration at their homestead, the cabin filled with neighbors and well-wishers. There was music and dancing, food and drink, laughter and goodwill. As evening fell, guests began to depart, calling final congratulations as they bundled into wagons and sleighs for the journey home. When the last had gone, Isaiah and Bella stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge above the snow-covered valley. "Happy?" Isaiah asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "More than I can say," Bella replied, leaning into him. "It feels right, doesn't it? Like we've come full circle." "Like coming home," he agreed, "which reminds me I have something for you." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. Bella opened it, eyes widening as she read. "Isaiah, this is a deed for the Jenkins property," he nodded. "Old man Jenkins never had heirs. His place went up for auction last month. I bid on it with the last of my bounty money." "But why?" Bella looked confused. "We already have this land." "Look at the survey map on the back," Isaiah urged. Bella turned the paper over, studying the drawing. The Jenkins property bordered their land to the south, effectively doubling their holdings. But what caught her eye was what Isaiah had sketched in the center, where the 2 properties met a large house, much bigger than their current cabin. "What is this?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand. "Our future," Isaiah said simply. Room for children to run, for horses to graze. A place worth building, worth fighting for, he cupped her cheek. A legacy, Bella, something to leave behind when we're gone. Tears filled her eyes. It's perfect, she whispered. When do we start? Spring, he said. We'll break ground as soon as the frost leaves the soil. Bella threw her arms around his neck, the deed still clutched in her hand. I love you, Isaiah O'Connor. And I love you, Bella O'Connor, he replied, still savoring the sound of her new name, more than life itself. They stood there as the moon rose over Shadow Creek Valley, silver light painting the snow in ghostly beauty. From somewhere in the distance came the haunting call of a coyote, answered by another farther away. Listen, Bella said suddenly. Do you hear it? Isaiah listened, and there it was, the faint melody of the valley's song, not sung by any human voice, but somehow present in the whisper of wind through the pines. I hear it, he said, holding her close. Just like the night you called me home. Spring came to Shadow Creek Valley in a rush of melting snow and new green growth. Isaiah and Bella were ready, seeds purchased, plans drawn, hopes high. They broke ground for the new house on the first truly warm day in April, a small ceremony just between the two of them. To new beginnings, Isaiah said, turning the first shovelful of earth. And to remembering how we got here, Bella added, her hand over his on the shovel handle. They built through the summer, hiring help when needed but doing much of the work themselves. The house took shape, a sturdy two-story structure of local timber and stone, with large windows to catch the light, and a wide porch wrapping around three sides. In July, Bella shared news that added urgency to their building project. She was expecting a child, due in the early months of the new year. Are you happy? She asked as Isaiah stood speechless, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. Beyond words, he finally managed, gathering her into his arms. Beyond anything I could have imagined. They redoubled their efforts on the house, determined to be settled before winter came and the baby with it. The community rallied around them, neighbors helping with barn raising and finishing work, bringing food for the workers, offering advice and good wishes. By October, the house was nearly complete, lacking only final touches. They moved in on a golden autumn day, carrying their few possessions from the cabin that had been their first home together. It's perfect, Bella said, standing in the center of the large main room, sunlight streaming through the windows. Her hand rested on her growing belly, a gesture that had become habitual. Isaiah came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her. It is now, he said, kissing her cheek. Now that you're in it. December brought heavy snow and the completion of the house. Christmas was a quiet affair, just the two of them before the fire in their new home. They exchanged simple gifts, a carved wooden cradle from Isaiah to Bella, a new leather-bound journal from her to him. For recording our family's story, she explained as he ran his fingers over the smooth cover. So our children will know where they came from. It's perfect, Isaiah said, already imagining what he would write first, the story of a cowboy riding through a valley at dusk, called home by a voice on the wind. Their son was born on a bitter cold night in January, arriving after a long labor that left Isaiah pacing anxiously while the midwife attended Bella upstairs. When at last he was allowed in, the sight of his wife holding their child stole his breath. Come meet your son, Bella said, her face tired but radiant. Isaiah approached the bed cautiously, overwhelmed by the tiny being wrapped in blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened them briefly, eyes the same clear blue as his mother's. He's beautiful, Isaiah whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, a grip surprisingly strong for one so small. What shall we call him? They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one. Now Bella looked down at their son thoughtfully. What about Isaac? It means he laughs. Isaac, Isaiah repeated, testing it. Isaac O'Connor, I like it. Isaac James O'Connor, Bella added quietly, if that's all right with you. Isaiah met her eyes, understanding what she was asking, that despite everything, James had been her brother and part of their story. It's more than all right, he assured her. It's fitting. Bella smiled, relief in her eyes. Welcome to the world, Isaac James, she said to the sleeping infant. As if in response, the wind picked up outside, whistling around the eaves of their new home. But inside, all was warm and still, a family complete at last. Spring returned to Shadow Creek Valley, bringing with it Isaac's first smiles, the planting of new crops and the expansion of the herd. Isaiah and Bella fell into the rhythm of parenthood with the same determination they'd applied to building their home, taking turns with night feedings, working in shifts to ensure both the baby and the homestead were tended. As Isaac grew, so did their operation. By his first birthday, they had doubled their cattle, added a flock of sheep, and planted an orchard that would bear fruit in years to come. The house that had seemed so large when they built it began to feel just right, filled with the sounds of family life and the occasional visitor. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Isaac asleep in his cradle beside them, Bella turned to Isaiah with a familiar look in her eye. "I've been thinking," she began. "Still a dangerous pastime," he teased, earning a playful swat on the arm. "I'm being serious," she insisted, though her eyes sparkled. "I've been thinking about the future, about our family." Isaiah took her hand. "What about it? Isaac needs siblings," Bella said decisively. "And I've always wanted a house full of children." "As many as you want," Isaiah promised, drawing her close. "This valley's big enough for a dozen O'Connors." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Bella laughed. "But perhaps we could start with one more." Isaiah's smile was answer enough. Their daughter, Elena Rose, was born the following spring, a fair child with her father's green eyes and her mother's determined chin. Isaac, now a sturdy toddler, regarded his sister with solemn curiosity before declaring her pretty in his limited vocabulary. The years that followed brought both joy and challenge. There were hard winters when supplies ran low, dry summers when crops withered in the fields. There was illness Isaac with scarlet fever that had them praying by his bedside for 3 terrifying nights, Bella with a persistent cough one winter that wouldn't quit until spring came. But there were far more good times than bad. The children grew strong and bright, learning to ride almost as soon as they could walk, helping with chores as they got older. They added a 3rd child, William, when Isaac was 7, and Elena, 5, a mischievous boy who kept them all on their toes. Through it all, the bond between Isaiah and Bella only strengthened. Each challenge faced together, each joy shared, wove another thread in the fabric of their life. They disagreed at times, argued occasionally, but never went to sleep without resolving their differences, a pact made in those early days of reconciliation that served them well through the years. On the 10th anniversary of Isaiah's return, they rode together to the ridge where they had raced horses and rekindled their love. The children were with neighbors for the day, giving them rare time alone. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years, Bella said as they dismounted. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes like a lifetime ago," Isaiah added, spreading a blanket on the grass for them to sit. "Look how much has changed." From their vantage point, they could see their property stretching below the main house with its red roof, the new barn they'd built 3 summers ago, fields of wheat and corn, pastures dotted with cattle and sheep. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney, and in the corral, horses moved about in the late afternoon sun. "We've built something good," Bella said softly, "something that will last." Isaiah reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring he'd given her all those years ago. "It almost didn't happen," he said, his voice grave, "if I hadn't heard your voice that night." "But you did," Bella reminded him. "Across all that distance, through all that pain, you heard me and you came home." "I'll always come home to you," Isaiah promised, "no matter what." As if in answer, a breeze swept across the ridge, carrying with it the faint sound of music, the valley song, sung by no human voice but present nonetheless in the whisper of wind through grass, the rustle of leaves in the trees. "Listen," Bella said, a smile spreading across her face. "The valley's singing to us." Isaiah drew her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against him. "It always has been," he said. "We just had to learn how to hear it." They stayed on the ridge until dusk began to fall, watching as the valley they loved was painted in shades of gold and amber. As the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky, they mounted their horses and rode home side by side. Drawn by the lights of their house shining in the gathering darkness, a beacon calling them home, just as Bella's voice had once called Isaiah across the miles. The legacy they built lasted long after them, passed down through generations of O'Connors who worked the land, loved the valley, and told the story of their ancestors, a cowboy who rode through the valley at dusk, and the woman whose voice called him home from the wind.